9. Oxygen tanks become flying missiles. Any metal object that enters an MRI room can pose a potential danger to anyone nearby. But oxygen tanks seem to be particularly deadly projectiles. A pair of employees at a hospital in Mumbai learned this lesson firsthand in November 2014, when one of them entered an MRI room carrying an oxygen cylinder. Without warning, the metal canister barreled toward the magnetic field, pinning the men against the machine. The technician and ward assistant were trapped for 4 hours after their colleagues tried unsuccessfully to free them. They both fell unconscious as they waited for an MRI engineer to arrive and deactivate the machine's magnetic field. Ward assistant Sunil Jadhav, who carried the oxygen tank into the room, escaped with just an elbow fracture. The technician, Swami Ramai, suffered from more severe injuries, including internal bleeding, organ damage, and nerve damage. But he was lucky enough to survive because not everyone who ends up in this unusual type of predicament lives to talk about it. In 2021, a 60-year-old patient was fatally struck by a flying oxygen tank inside an MRI room in Gimhae, South Korea. After being hit in the head by the 132-pound or 60-kilogram canister, the elderly gentleman began having seizures. He was rushed to the emergency room, where doctors were unable to save his life despite their best efforts. Following the tragedy, authorities issued a statement vowing to thoroughly investigate the cause of the deadly accident. An official acknowledged that metal objects are normally not allowed inside of MRI rooms, but said the patient was in critical condition and couldn't be taken off his oxygen tank. Ironically, it appears as though he died as the result of a direct effort to keep him alive. 8. Hospital visitor gets fatally sucked in. In yet another deadly MRI accident involving an oxygen tank, a 32-year-old man named Rajesh Maru was sucked into an MRI machine at a hospital in Mumbai in 2018 after he walked into the room carrying an elderly relative's oxygen cylinder. His hand became stuck between the MRI machine and the cylinder, and bystanders were unable to free him. The impact caused the oxygen tank to leak, and Maru died within 2 minutes from inhaling liquid oxygen. In layman's terms, his official cause of death was described as an unnatural buildup of air between the lung and chest wall. According to witnesses, Maru's body began to swell as soon as he got sucked into the machine. He was unable to speak, and by the time he was rushed to the emergency room, it was too late to save his life. Relatives told investigators that Maru was at the hospital to visit his sister's mother-in-law. He was reportedly unaware that the MRI machine was on when he entered the room and was fatally pinned. Following the tragedy, 3 hospital employees were arrested for allegedly causing Maru's death due to negligence. In a lawsuit against the hospital, his family accused staff members of failing to switch the machine off before he entered the room. 7. Wheelchair patient narrowly avoids disaster. A patient in Shanghai was lucky to walk away unscathed, and his family was equally fortunate to avoid costly penalties after his wheelchair flew across an MRI room and got stuck to the machine during a hospital visit in 2016. Several people tried removing the wheelchair to no avail, including security guards who rushed over to offer their assistance. Luckily, they eventually separated the wheelchair from the machine. According to news reports, the machine had already been switched off before the patient entered the room, but its residual magnetic force was strong enough to instantly pull the wheelchair toward it. Photos of the wheelchair went viral on the Chinese social media network Weibo, where an MRI expert commented that the family could have been forced to pay 300,000 yuan, or $42,000 for the damages to the machine if it had been broken. According to the commenter, the machine would have been out of service for several days while the costly repairs were carried out. Luckily, there were reportedly no major damages to the machine, although it was out of service for several days so it could be tested to ensure it was running properly. A hospital spokesperson confirmed that the family would not have to pay for repairs because the machine was still under warranty. Social media users expressed a variety of opinions. with many admonishing the patient for causing the machine to be unusable when there were other patients who needed it. Others assumed that the patient had ignored a doctor's orders not to enter the room with their wheelchair, and some said the patient deserved to be held accountable for the incident. 6. Swedish nurse gets sued. In October 2019, a Swedish nurse entered a mobile MRI trailer outside a hospital in Luleå while wearing a weighted vest and was sucked into the machine. After narrowly avoiding injury, a patient who was in the room helped security guards free the trapped nurse, who had fallen unconscious. The incident immediately raised questions about the nurse's conduct, especially considering the more than 10 years of experience he had with operating MRI machines. For months afterward, authorities investigated while the prosecutor in charge of the case weighed whether or not to pursue charges against the nurse for endangering others. In the meantime, the unnamed nurse's employer stood behind him. A spokesperson for the company said that they had offered support to the nurse while awaiting a decision on whether or not he would face a court case. In February 2020, prosecutor Marta Ward declined to charge the healthcare worker due to a lack of evidence. According to a statement issued to Swedish public radio, there simply wasn't enough to prove that the nurse deliberately put anyone in harm's way. 5. Deadly dye. It's common for doctors to inject patients with a contrast dye called gadolinium before an MRI to enhance the results. An estimated 1 in every 250 patients suffers a hypersensitive or allergic reaction to the dye, and in rare cases, the effects can be deadly. A woman from Muscatine, Iowa named Catherine Decker became one of the unlucky few to lose their life in 2018, when she immediately suffered brain injuries from gadolinium dye. Less than an hour later, she was pronounced dead. In a wrongful death lawsuit, Decker's family accused University of Iowa hospital staff of failing to warn them about the potential risks of the contrast dye and failing to respond properly to Catherine's anaphylactic reaction. They were awarded a $2 million settlement. A similar tragedy occurred in Switzerland in June of 2023, when an infamous Russian tycoon named Sergei Korshkov died from a fatal gadolinium reaction. The 42-year-old was wanted in Russia for illegal gambling and money laundering when the incident occurred, leading many to automatically suspect that he had met with foul play and that his death was not accidental. It's understandable that people jump to this conclusion, considering the string of suspicious deaths of rich Russians in recent years. As a former government official turned crime boss, Korshkov certainly fell into the category of high-ranking criminals that tend to die by mysterious means. But it's also completely plausible that he's among the unlucky minority of patients who have died from a severe reaction to gadolinium dye. Gadolinium is a toxic metal, and exposure to it can have lasting effects, even in non-fatal cases. About a year before Decker's death, the Food and Drug Administration published new information about the risks and potential side effects of gadolinium. The agency advised medical providers to carefully consider gadolinium's health risks before administering it to patients, especially because the body retains the dye. There have also been rising concerns in recent years about a debilitating and incurable condition known as gadolinium deposition disease, which results from a buildup of gadolinium in the body. The symptoms include, but are not limited to, persistent headaches, fatigue, reduced cognitive function or brain fog, bone and joint pain, skin discoloration, a pins and needles sensation, and more. Simply put, a growing number of experts are agreeing that gadolinium contrast dye should only be given to a patient when it's deemed absolutely necessary. 4. Shots fired. While accompanying his mother to a hospital in Sao Paulo for an MRI in early 2023, a Brazilian lawyer named Leandro Matias de Noves failed to inform staff members that he had a gun in his possession. Even after being told to remove all metal objects before entering the MRI room, Noves made no mention of the firearm he was carrying. Upon entering the room, The machine's magnetic field yanked the gun out of the attorney's waistband, causing it to fire in the process. The bullet struck Novaes in the stomach, and he was rushed to a nearby emergency room, where he died from his injuries several weeks later. A spokesperson for the facility where the deadly accident occurred released a statement asserting that staff members had taken customary accident prevention measures prior to the incident. In other words, Novaes and his mother were advised that they needed to remove any and all metal objects before entering the MRI room, and both parties signed forms acknowledging the protocol. As a result, it was determined that Novaes knowingly went against the advice and chose to take his gun into the room. The gun was registered and licensed in his name, so he had no logical reason not to hand it over for the duration of the MRI test. Novaes was popular on TikTok, where he had a growing audience of more than 8,000 followers. His content revolved mainly around his love of guns and advocacy for gun owners' rights. Unfortunately, his failure to follow a basic safety rule needlessly cost him his life. 3. MRI blunders nearly kill hundreds. Over a nearly 2-year period lasting from April 2020 to March 2022, at least 315 British patients with pacemakers, artificial joints, and other metal implants were erroneously prescribed MRI scans by their doctors. Given the strong magnetic field that an MRI machine generates, it can easily displace a metal implant, and the results can range from devastating to deadly. In one close call, staff members at a hospital in Yorkshire aborted an MRI scan after noticing that a patient's pacemaker was heating up dangerously. Another patient only thought to alert staff to a metal implant in their nose after their MRI scan had started. In these and other cases, patients only narrowly avoided serious injury or death. According to the Daily Mail, many of these individuals were elderly, disoriented, or otherwise not in a coherent enough mental state to properly fill out consent forms for their MRI scans. In many cases, staff members realized at the last minute that a patient had a metal object in their body and therefore should not undergo an MRI under any circumstances. By reporting these near misses, British health officials said that medical experts could better understand how certain cases fly under the radar and how to prevent this from continuing to happen in the future. And while several hundred close calls over a 2-year period sounds like a lot, it represents a very small fraction of the hundreds of thousands of MRIs that are carried out in the UK each year. 2. Hospital worker crushed to death. Tragedy befell a group of workers at the University of Utah Hospital in September 2021, when an MRI machine fell and crushed one of the employees. The workers had been contracted through an outside company to move the machine from the 4th to the 1st floor and were in the process of doing so when the incident occurred. When the machine fell, it took one of the team members with it. He was rushed to the emergency department nearby, where he died from his injuries, while another worker survived with minor injuries. The man's unexpected death came as a shock to the community during what was supposed to be a milestone occasion for the hospital. Plans to move the MRI machine had been in the works for years. Hospital spokesperson Alison Finn Gaffney told ABC4 that moving the machine was an outside event that required scaffolding, infrastructure, and multiple safety components. These types of projects are carried out all the time and had been undertaken many times before at the hospital without any issues, according to Gaffney, who said that the cause of the accident was unclear. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear even more stories, stay tuned for some extra content that you might have missed. 1. Teen tragedy. After receiving hormone treatment to combat a growth defect in 2018, Alice Sloman's heart became dangerously enlarged. But instead of noticing that the British teen's heart had grown to roughly twice its normal size, doctors were concerned with finding out whether the hormone treatment had caused a fluid buildup on her brain. To find out, they scheduled her for an MRI. Sloman was supposed to be the first patient to receive an MRI on the day of her appointment, but she ended up having to wait several hours. She became anxious and was given general anesthesia to calm her down. But the medication caused her to have a heart attack in the middle of her MRI scan. As soon as they realized something was terribly wrong, doctors stopped the scan and rushed the young woman to the emergency room, where she died 3 days later. An autopsy found that Alice had experienced a dangerously low heart rate during her MRI, causing her to become critically ill. The medical examiner's report concluded that the anesthetic she received for her anxiety was a precipitating factor of her fatal heart attack. Her death also resulted from mitochondrial disease, multiple organ failure, and myocardial fibrosis. Sloman suffered from an unidentified genetic condition which inhibited her growth. She had seen multiple specialists over a 9-year period, and while doctors failed to identify the cause of her small body size, they tried to treat it by prescribing growth hormone. After Alice's death, a coroner's inquest ruled that the doctors treating her and carrying out her MRI should have sought further guidance on her condition. The teen's parents claimed that they had repeatedly expressed concerns about their daughter's breathlessness and other symptoms. Yet, 2 of Alice's treating doctors claimed that they had no knowledge of these factors, which were indicative of an underlying disorder. According to the coroner, Alice's parents requested further investigation into her health on at least 2 occasions, and the resources were available to do so. But their request was never honored, and doctors therefore never noticed her dangerously enlarged heart until it was too late to save her life. No amount of corrective action will bring Alice back, but her parents wanted to make sure no other families suffer preventable deaths due to this type of negligence. They spent a large amount of money pursuing the inquest, and the result validated their long-held suspicions that their daughter might still be alive if her heart condition had been discovered sooner. Following the inquest, 2 local hospitals launched independent investigations in hopes of improving treatment standards for patients and hopefully ensuring that a similar incident never happens again.
9. Atilla Ban. After failing to get into the college of his choice in Budapest in 2011, 20-year-old Tibor Vas moved to London to work at a hotel near Heathrow Airport. While there, he met and became good friends with co-workers Alice Adams, a 20-year-old performing arts student, and 31-year-old Atilla Ban, who was also from Hungary. It's unclear whether Vas realized this, but Attila's interest in him surpassed friendship. Atilla lived in one of the nicer employee apartments, and he invited his younger co-worker to live with him. In the meantime, he grew increasingly jealous of the close friendship between Vas and Alice Adams, even though the two were strictly platonic. Vas then applied to college in Budapest again and got accepted the second time around, which meant that he'd be leaving his job in London. One day, shortly before Vas was scheduled to return to Hungary, the 3 failed to show up for work. When their colleagues went to Attila's flat to check on them, they walked in on a horror scene. They found Alice stabbed to death in the living room. In a bedroom, they found Vas, who had also been stabbed naked and lifeless. Atilla, however, was nowhere to be found. The scene was littered with alcohol bottles and evidence that the 3 had taken a party drug known as poppers, which are known for getting people in the mood. There was also evidence of intimacy between the victims, and DNA testing would later reveal that Atilla was involved in the romp. Unsure if Atilla was missing and in danger, or if he was guilty of foul play and had gone on the run, investigators paid attention to his social media activity. A post that he made after the discovery of the bodies indicated that he was in the apartment, which had been sealed off as a crime scene and should have been inaccessible. Investigators were baffled and returned to the scene, where they found him lying in bed, drunk and in a state of semi-consciousness. It was during that visit that detectives discovered a cut mark in the divan bed that they'd found Vas's body on, revealing that Atilla had apparently never even left the scene. Instead, he'd hidden beneath the bed during the initial discovery of the bodies. The investigation revealed that Atilla had gotten upset with Alice and Vas just days before the double murder because they took a photo together and didn't include him. As the evidence against him stacked up, it began to look as if he killed his co-workers in a jealous rage after realizing that his feelings for Vas weren't reciprocated. Atilla admitted to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, arguing that his ailing mental health triggered the attack. But the jury found him guilty of the murders, and he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 26 years. 8. Lynnhajney and Tommy duet. When 63-year-old tech entrepreneur John C. Igerter failed to show up for work one day in 2011, his employees knew something was very wrong. As a lifelong workaholic who never married or had children, Igerter's daily routine was like clockwork, so it was odd that he failed to let anyone know he wouldn't be in that day. An employee called the police, who reported to Igerter's home in Brookfield, Wisconsin. When nobody answered the door, officers gained entry through a window. The home was a hoarded mess of electrical supplies and radio equipment, initially making it difficult to tell if it had been ransacked. Responding officers also had a tough time finding Igerter and were actually about to leave when they spotted him in a sleeping bag on the garage floor. He'd been bound and beaten to death, and there was a plastic bag around his head. A closer look at Igerter's belongings revealed the presence of expensive and valuable equipment in his home, indicating that the murder wasn't the result of a burglary gone wrong, but rather an act of retribution. Phone records showed that Igerter's last conversation had taken place the night before with 48-year-old Lynnhajney, a former employee he'd recently fired for insubordination. Shortly after discovering Igerter's body, police in Waukesha County were contacted by authorities in Washington County. Hajney has shown up at a relative's house with her boyfriend, Tommy V. Duet, and confessed to having just killed someone. The pair planned to go on the run, but the relative contacted the police, who showed up at the home in time to take the couple into custody. Initially, Hajney avoided speaking with detectives and retained an attorney. Duet was more than willing to talk, however. He said that Lynn told him Igerter owed a large amount of money to her estranged husband, Al, who'd worked for Igerter in the past. Hajney allegedly told Duet that Igerter was giving Al the runaround. Then, she asked Duet to go to Igerter's house with her on the night of the murder. Assuming they were just going to the house to collect the unpaid debt, Duet accompanied Hajney to the home. Duet claimed that he got into a physical fight with Igerter to protect Hajney, and the thing simply went too far. He insisted that he never meant to kill Igerter, but authorities were unconvinced that it was a case of self-defense that spiraled out of control, especially given the manner in which Igerter's body was found. The more investigators dug, the more evidence they discovered of a sordid murder plot involving a third suspect named Mark Finken, who worked for the Wauwatosa Police Department. Phone records and emails showed that Finken was involved in the plot to kill Igerter, but he took his life after undergoing questioning. Investigators surmised that Finken had access to records about Igerter's finances and properties, and planned to help Hajney take over his assets after his murder. Tommy Duet eventually admitted that he was a willing party in the plot. Long story short, Lynnhajney was jealous of Igerter's financial success and wanted a piece of the pie. Duet was convicted of first-degree intentional homicide and was sentenced to 30 years in prison, followed by 20 years of post-release supervision. Lynnhajney entered an offered plea to felony murder, which meant that she maintained her innocence but admitted that the prosecution likely had enough evidence to convict her. She was sentenced to 15 years and 9 months in prison, followed by 5 years and 3 months of post-release supervision. 7. Liam Hamilton. 20-year-old Liam Hamilton was working as an electrician's apprentice in Hertfordshire, England in 2021, when a heavy load of material fell several stories from a forklift and landed on his head. He was wearing a hard hat at the time, but it wasn't enough to protect him from injury. After being rushed to the hospital, Hamilton underwent emergency brain surgery and was put in a medically induced coma for 4 days. The recovery's been grueling and has left Hamilton with ongoing cognitive, strength and balance problems. Nearly 2 years after the accident, in December 2022, he had a seizure, which left the future of his career uncertain. Hamilton told the press that he didn't remember the incident, but he recalled waking up in the hospital when he came out of his coma. He said that his injuries changed him from being an average young man to a reserved person who avoids busy places. Simple activities that most people take for granted, like walking and talking at the same time, are a constant challenge for Hamilton. He also struggles with concentration and memory issues, making him dependent on his parents at an age when most people are becoming independent. Investigation found Hamilton's former employer in violation of multiple safety rules, including the requirement to mark an exclusion zone to prevent workers from walking into an area where things could fall. The company was also accused of failing to provide proper machinery for the kind of work that was being done at the job site. Hamilton said that the uncertainty of the future was the hardest aspect of the situation to come to terms with, but he was determined to recover and move on. 6. Shannon Braier. As the main breadwinner for her family since her teenage years, 20-year-old Shannon Braier was thrilled when she landed her dream job at the demolition site of an old college in Essex, England in 2020. Her new gig went horribly wrong, however, when a 23-ton excavator swung around and hit her in the head while she was installing a fuel pump. Shannon's head was crushed between the excavator and the fuel pump, leaving her with a fractured neck bone, broken bones in her face, and other devastating injuries. The young woman was airlifted to a hospital where doctors were initially unsure whether she'd survive, and at one point they told Shannon's family to say their goodbyes. But she refused to give up the fight for her life, and miraculously she began to recover. More than 2 years later, she was still unable to work as she continued to undergo rehabilitation and corrective surgeries. The accident has left her with lasting injuries, including facial paralysis resulting from nerve damage. Shannon was angry at the company, Ace Demolition, and the site supervisor John Gilligan for failing to take steps to prevent the accident from happening. Authorities found the employer to be in violation of health and safety laws for not taking the proper precautions to keep workers away from the excavator while Shannon installed the pump. The court ordered the company to pay more than $37,300 in fines and court costs, and John Gilligan was hit with 250 hours of community service. After fighting for her life and suffering permanent damage, Shannon felt that these punishments were far too forgiving. But she knew that there was no changing the outcome, so she's since vowed to move on with her life. 5. Bibiana Arano de Labra. While operating a large industrial mixing machine at Automatic Rolls in North Carolina in 2022, Bibiana Arano de Labra was crushed to death by the equipment. Emergency responders tried to save the 22-year-old, but unfortunately she died from her injuries. When the story broke, it was unclear what exactly caused the accident. At the time, agents from the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, were investigating in hopes of getting to the bottom of the situation. Automatic Rolls is owned by Northeast Foods, one of the biggest suppliers of buns, rolls, and bread products in the United States. In a statement, the company extended its condolences to de Labra's family and reassured the public that it was cooperating with the investigation. The victim's co-workers expressed their anger and concern when they learned of de Labra's death. When interviewed by The Militant about the incident, Chief Shop Steward Monica Dunn said that no product is worth being hurt or killed for. At the moment, the inquiry into the accident is ongoing, so we'll have to wait and see what consequences the company will receive in the coming months. 4. Courtney Savage. When being a patient care technician didn't pay the bills, mother of 5 Christina Loggerini took a job managing a lingerie store and exotic modeling studio in Largo, Florida. She eventually became best friends with the shop's owner, former Hillsborough County Deputy Courtney Savage, who ended up having to take several months off due to heavy metal poisoning from some dental work she'd gotten while she was in Mexico. During Courtney's time off, Christina continued to manage the shop. However, there are conflicting stories about what happened next. Christina claimed that the landlord refused to renew the lease for the shop because the bar next door wanted to expand its space. She even asked the landlord to reconsider, but he said no, so she packed up the shop and returned the unsold merchandise. According to Courtney, however, Christina failed to pay the rent and the landlord evicted the business. Courtney also alleged that Christina owed her $15,000 for unsold merchandise that she never returned. In the meantime, Christina rented a storefront and opened up her own lingerie and exotic modeling business. The situation left Courtney feeling betrayed, but she failed to tell Christina just how upset she was, and the more she held her anger in, the more it started to boil over. Just 10 days after the grand opening of Christina's new business in 2006, someone broke in. Nothing was stolen, so it appeared to be solely an act of vandalism, indicating that it may have been revenge-driven. Less than an hour later, shots were fired into Christina's husband's van in the driveway of the couple's Clearwater home. Early the next morning, someone left Christina a threatening voicemail, stating that there wouldn't be any warning shots next time. At the urging of the police, Christina bought a surveillance camera and installed it on the outside of her home. For a while, life mostly returned to normal. But the security camera came in handy when the shooter returned to the home and was captured on video firing shots straight into the dwelling. The footage showed a woman pulling up in an SUV, getting out and walking forward while firing multiple shots. In addition to damaging the home, the bullets broke a window and the shattered glass fell into the crib of Christina's sleeping baby, who thankfully only sustained minor injuries. Police could tell, based on the woman's shooting stance, that she most likely had law enforcement training. And while her face was too blurred to positively identify her, Christina could tell that it was Courtney because of the way the suspect walked. Authorities still needed more evidence before they could make an arrest though, so they had Christina call Courtney while they listened in. She asked her best friend why she would do something so horrible, and while Courtney didn't explicitly admit to the act, she agreed that a payment of $2,000 would be a good start to righting the wrongs between them. The women agreed to meet at a local diner to exchange the money, but instead, the police were there waiting to take Courtney into custody. Thinking that her honesty would get her off easy, especially since she had no prior convictions, Courtney admitted to the crimes. She was initially charged with shooting into an occupied dwelling, but the charge was upgraded to attempted murder. Instead of facing the music in court, Courtney went on the run. First, she went to Mexico and got plastic surgery to alter her appearance. She then spent the next year living under a fake identity and working jobs that paid under the table. The law finally caught up with her in Texas, however, after she was featured in an episode of America's Most Wanted. In addition to the initial charges she faced, Courtney was hit with more counts for evading justice. In the end, she took a deal and pleaded guilty to all counts in exchange for a 20-year prison sentence, followed by 10 years of probation. 3. Mitchell Sims. After taking a job at a Domino's in South Carolina in 1985, Mitchell Sims was promoted to manager. But he had a falling out with his boss and quit when part of his bonus was withheld from him. Later that year, he took a job as a delivery driver at another Domino's franchise in Hanahan, but he still held a grudge against his previous boss for the disagreement that led him to quitting. So he decided to take out his frustrations on people who had nothing to do with it. Sims entered his workplace one night and gunned down 2 co-workers, execution style. Christopher Zur died at the scene, and the other victim, Gary Melk, survived long enough to get to the police station and implicate Sims, despite being shot in the head and neck 4 times. Unfortunately though, he died from his injuries several days later. In the meantime, Sims fled to Glendale, California with his girlfriend Ruby Paget. One night, they ordered a Domino's pizza to the motel room where they were hiding out with sinister intentions. They tied up John Harrigan, the delivery man, when he arrived, and then drowned him in the bathtub. The couple stole Harrigan's truck and drove to the nearby Domino's restaurant he worked out of. While there, Sims and Paget tied up the two employees on duty inside the walk-in cooler in a manner that required them to stand on their tiptoes to avoid hanging themselves. Authorities caught up with the couple in Las Vegas. Paget was sentenced to life in prison for her role in the crimes, and Sims was tried in both South Carolina and California and was found guilty in both cases. He was sentenced to death in California, but continues to languish on death row amid a pause in executions in the state, despite having exhausted all his appeals. 2. Raphael Apolinar. Looking to avoid the gang lifestyle that was prevalent in the neighborhood he grew up in, James Blanco took a job at a mattress factory in Fresno, California. The work was unglamorous, hot, and physically demanding, but he stuck with it and quickly rose through the ranks, eventually becoming the manager of the entire plant. Blanco used his position to give opportunities to young people from his community who were also seeking to avoid falling into a life of crime. One of those individuals was Raphael Apolinar, a known local gang member with a checkered past. Believing he could help turn Apolinar into a productive member of society, Blanco gave him a job. Apolinar had issues with authority and struggled to get along with co-workers, but Blanco tried not to give up on him. He moved Apolinar to various departments, hoping to find the right fit for him, until it became clear that the young man couldn't play well enough with others to be successful at the job. When Apolinar got into a physical fight with a co-worker, it was the last straw. Realizing he could no longer realistically keep giving Apolinar second chances, Blanco fired him. Apolinar supposedly found an even better paying job as a furniture delivery man, but he clung tight to his grudge against Blanco for firing him. He felt disrespected, and he thought Blanco was full of himself due to his success. So, one night in 2011, around 6 months after Apolinar was fired, Blanco was shot in the head while taking a shower. Someone had stood at the window of the bathroom and fired the bullet from outside. Earlier that evening, Apolinar had confronted Blanco's brother, Harvey. He made it clear that he was still upset over losing his job and threatened to go tell Blanco to his face. Harvey figured Apolinar was just drunk and blowing off steam. But in hindsight, he couldn't think of anyone else who might have wanted to kill his brother. Witness descriptions of the shooter's vehicle matched Apolinar's truck. Apolinar initially denied involvement in the murder. By then, a friend of his and a fellow gang member, known only as AM, had admitted to being at the scene when the crime took place. AM implicated Apolinar as the shooter, but the scorned employee tried pointing the finger at AM, claiming that his buddy was upset at Blanco for not giving him a job. According to Apolinar, he planned the shooting, but just wanted to scare Blanco and changed his mind at the last minute, at which point AM decided to carry out the crime. Prosecutors were certain enough that Apolinar was the killer to try him for murder. And although their star witness AM never showed up to testify, the evidence was compelling enough for a jury to convict Apolinar of first-degree murder. As a result, he was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. 1. Steve Silva. 29-year-old barber Steve Silva was giving someone a haircut at a barbershop in Boston, Massachusetts one day in 2021 when he slipped on a wet floor and fell with a pair of 6.5-inch shears in his hand. He later told the New York Post that the scissors were around his finger and pointed inward toward his arm. Silva broke his fall with his hands, causing the blades to plunge into his chest. Blood spewed from the wound as Silva applied pressure to it with help from 2 co-workers and his customer. He was then rushed to the hospital, where doctors performed emergency open-heart surgery after discovering that the scissors had pierced an artery, narrowly missing his heart. After undergoing the operation and having his chest stapled up, Silva was released from the hospital in stable condition, but would require several weeks of bed rest before he was well enough to return to normal life. Unfortunately, the accident required him to cancel an upcoming getaway with his girlfriend. But all things considered, the outcome could have been much worse. Silva told the Post that he felt lucky, but also that he felt like a klutz. In a true display of dedication to his professionalism, he called the customer he was helping when he got hurt to make sure their haircut was finished.
Thanks for watching. Have you ever thought twice about receiving medical treatment due to the risks, even though doctors said you needed it? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.